Layoffs, especially from the tech companies, have dominated the news cycle over the last year. More than 160,000 employees were laid off in 2022, and that number has risen to almost 195,000 in 2023, with companies such as Meta cutting another 10,000 jobs after laying off 13% of its workforce previously. The idea of losing your job can be frightening.
1,000 people get laid off. Wow, that's shocking. But you could in the United States say, we will lay off 10,000 people. It's okay. They have a big stomach for those negative events. So I think we have a different psychology, right, in terms of layoffs. So this is kind of interesting.
So what are the real costs of layoffs? And are these costs universally felt repercussions, or do they differ from country to country? Over the last 3 years, the surge in demand for tech and increase in available funding allowed big tech companies to hire aggressively, almost doubling their workforce.
So high-tech companies tend to operate in a different logic and tends to rely on investment. So when the economy is in a good mode, high-tech companies tend to hire a lot. For example, Meta alone during COVID hired how many? 40,000.
But when the Feds raised interest rates 10 times over the last year, the aggressive tightening policy was eating into the tech companies' profits.
We know right now they have laid off 21,000 people. So about half of those were hired. So those companies tend to engage in this very dramatic shift, hiring and firing.
By shedding part of the workforce, this helps to assure investors that the company is handling the finances of the firm and protecting shareholders' interests.
The Federal Reserve rate probably will still continue to increase until end of this year. By this estimation, those tech companies will continue to lay off until end of this year, at least.
Singapore is a very open economy, and significant moves from other countries are bound to impact us. But is this reflected in our local economy?
Of course, this is a United States situation. For Singapore, it's kind of different. So Singapore is still in a mode of expansion. Last quarter, we hired more than 230,000 people, although there were 4,000 people being laid off. That is just a small fraction of those being hired.
So even with a surge of layoffs in the fourth quarter of 2022, prospects of finding a new job still remain strong, with 73.1% of retrenched workers landing a new job within 6 months. The workforce has also gained momentum, with employment rates of residents 15 and over reaching 67.5% in 2022, surpassing pre-COVID numbers in 2019.
So although there are labor force layoffs in retrenchment cases, but still we see more people being added on in the labor force.
Compounding onto rapid rising cost of living, mass layoffs globally and locally can still create uncertainty within the workforce. Are layoffs effective in cost management? In short, no. Contrary to popular belief, layoffs don't usually reposition a firm towards growth. These firms have only a 21% chance of pulling ahead of the competition after the recession ends.
So mass layoffs requires retrenchment cost, and there are some hidden costs, including those survivors.
65% of layoff survivors say that they have been overworked since the layoff because they also had to perform tasks that their laid-off counterparts used to perform. Companies that laid off employees saw a decline in job performance, job satisfaction, organizational commitment from the remaining employees, and an increase in voluntary turnover.
As I said, layoff is a very costly endeavor for companies, so it has to be managed very carefully.
If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group being laid off.
When a company is engaging in mass layoffs, public perception is key. When managed poorly, layoffs also lead to reputational damage and a loss in trust, which makes it harder for companies to attract and rehire talent.
So there are some good practices of layoff. So for example, transparency is very important. Advance notice is very, very important. We know those high-tech companies like Google, they have advance notice. So they warn people there will be mass layoffs. They give specific figures. And also, I think Google gave very good fringe benefits. They compensate them very well. They help them to find next employer. They extend their health insurance coverage. all those extra benefits, I think, pushing the detrimental effects on those laid-off workers.
This might explain why Google still ranked top as Singapore's best employer despite cutting 12,000 jobs globally in 2022. So with multiple world events disrupting work as we know it, what would this mean for the workforce in the near future?
Most people nowadays will try different ways of employment. Even they will try to launch their own companies. So there are so many options right now.
Just over the last 2 years, the expansion into gig work has increased significantly. The global gig economy is expected to generate over $455 billion in 2023, almost double of that in 2018. So companies would not just be competing amongst themselves to attract and retain talent. What would employers have to do to hire from the talent pool?
Actually, one area of attraction is related to flexibility. Is the policy more flexible than others? For example, flexible in terms of time, in terms of work location, in terms of benefits. Specifically for the benefits, there are companies practice flexible benefits. For example, health insurance, they can give you multiple options, depends on your own personal needs. So those flexibilities, I think, in the future will become a must